"I sold it," my daughter Brenda said, her voice as flat and empty as the velvet box in my hands. "We needed the money for the trip to Cancun." The words hung in the quiet air of the home I'd shared with her mother for 40 years. This necklace, Fiona's gold locket, was the last piece of her that still felt warm, the only thing I had kept. But to my own daughter, it was just the price of a plane ticket. I thought that was the deepest a betrayal could cut. I was wrong. That one call triggered a chain of events that cost her everything. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The coldness of her confession struck me harder than a physical blow. It wasn't just the words, but the utter lack of remorse in her eyes. This was my daughter, the little girl I'd taught to ride a bike in the driveway, now a stranger standing in Fiona's kitchen. My mind flashed back to a rainy Tuesday nearly 30 years ago. Fiona coming home exhausted from a double shift at the hospital. She'd been saving for months to replace our leaking water heater, but that day she came in holding that small velvet box. "For our anniversary," she'd whispered, her hands placing the gold chain around her own neck. "A home is just a place, David. This is us." And now, us had been sold for $800. In that moment, watching Brenda turn back to her phone as if she'd just commented on the weather, I knew our family was a place I no longer recognized. The morning had started with the quiet ritual that marked Fiona's birthday for the past 3 years. I woke before the Texas sun had a chance to burn off the dawn chill, made coffee, and sat in the worn armchair she'd loved. Our home in the Austin suburbs, once filled with the chaos of a growing family, was now a silent monument to our life together. Everything was exactly as she'd left it, a museum of two people, curated by one. After coffee, I walked upstairs to my bedroom, to the top drawer of my dresser where the necklace lay. It was my only pilgrimage, a way to hold her close, to feel the familiar weight of the heart-shaped locket in my palm. But the box was empty. A cold dread, sharp and immediate, seized my chest. I pulled the drawer out completely, dumping socks and old handkerchiefs onto the bed. Nothing. I dropped to my knees, my breath catching in my throat as I checked under the dresser, finding only dust and an old receipt. The search grew frantic. I tore through the closet, patting down the pockets of coats I hadn't worn in years, then moved to the bathroom, my hands shaking as I emptied the medicine cabinet. Where was it? The question hammered in my head with every beat of my frantic heart. I walked downstairs, each step heavy. Brenda was on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Her husband, Kevin, was asleep in my recliner, a sports channel muttering on the TV. "Brenda," I started, my voice tight. "Have you seen your mother's necklace?" She didn't look up. "In your room, probably. You forget things, Dad." "I've looked everywhere. It's gone." "Oh." That's when she finally looked at me, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "Oh, that. I needed money for the vacation deposit. You said no, so I found another way." She spoke with a chilling matter-of-factness, as if she were discussing borrowing a cup of sugar. The world seemed to tilt. "You... what?" "I sold it," she repeated, her voice void of emotion. "We needed the money for the trip to Cancun." From the recliner, Kevin grunted without opening his eyes. "She's gone, David. Dead people don't need chivalry." The casual cruelty of it all, the absolute dismissal of 40 years of love and memory, left me breathless. I looked at my daughter, at the stranger she had become, and saw not a hint of the woman Fiona and I had raised. There was only a cold, hard emptiness. I stood there in the living room, a ghost in my own home, completely and utterly silent, shattered by a truth far uglier than an empty box. For an hour, I didn't move. I just sat in Fiona's armchair as the silence of the house pressed in on me, a physical weight on my chest. The shock had subsided, leaving behind a hollow ache that felt vast and permanent. My daughter had carved out a piece of my heart and sold it for sunshine and sand. The grief was suffocating, but then through the fog of despair, a different feeling began to surface, not anger, not yet, but a stubborn refusal to let Fiona's last tangible piece of memory be worn by a stranger on a beach in Cancun. It was a betrayal not just to me, but to her. I wouldn't let it stand. Brenda had mentioned the name of the pawn shop in passing, Desert Jewelers or something like it. I pulled out my phone, my hands still trembling slightly, and searched for pawn shops in the North Austin area. The list was long. The first 3 calls were dead ends. One shop was gruff and unhelpful. Another hadn't bought any gold lockets recently, and the third didn't answer. With each failed call, the hope that had flickered within me began to dim. On the 4th try, a calm, measured voice answered. "Desert Star Pawn. This is Samuel speaking." I described the necklace, my voice cracking slightly. "A gold chain with a heart-shaped locket. It was probably sold to you yesterday." There was a pause on the other end. "Yes," he said slowly. "I remember the piece. Exquisite craftsmanship. The woman who sold it was in a terrible hurry." He hesitated. Then his voice lowered. "Sir, are you her husband? There's an inscription. Fiona, my heart. D.O." Relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. "Yes, that's it. She was my wife. She passed away." "I'm very sorry for your loss," he said, and the sympathy in his voice felt genuine. "Sir, there's something else you need to know. When I was appraising the piece, I found the clasp to open the locket. It was very well hidden. There was something inside." My mind went blank. "Inside? I didn't know it opened. Fiona wore it for 40 years and I never knew." A tiny piece of folded paper, he continued. I put it aside, in an envelope. I felt it wasn't part of the sale. It seemed personal. The 20-minute drive to the shop felt like an eternity. The suburban streets I'd known my whole life became an unfamiliar landscape. My focus narrowed to a single point. A small, unassuming storefront tucked between a laundromat and a taqueria. Inside, a kind-faced man in his late 52nd, Samuel, greeted me. He placed the necklace on a soft cloth on the counter. Seeing it again, so familiar and radiant under the fluorescent lights, brought a lump to my throat. "I need to buy it back," I said, my voice thick. He nodded, his expression full of understanding. "She took $800 for it. The gold weight alone is worth more. To buy it back, policy says I have to sell it for its appraised value. $1,200. It was another sting, another piece of my savings gone because of Brenda's greed, but I didn't hesitate. I paid in cash. Samuel slid the necklace across the counter, along with a small white envelope. "Here's what was inside," he said gently. "I hope it brings you some peace." I drove 3 blocks before pulling into a deserted parking lot, my heart pounding. I carefully unwrapped the necklace, the familiar gold cool against my skin. Then, with trembling fingers, I opened the small envelope. Inside was a tiny piece of paper, folded into a tight square. I painstakingly unfolded it. On it, in Fiona's neat, precise handwriting, were 4 words. Bank of Austin, Box 734. I didn't sleep that night. The small piece of paper sat on my nightstand, illuminated by the glow of my alarm clock. Bank of Austin, Box 734. It felt like a message from another world, a final thread connecting me to Fiona. The next morning I dressed not in my usual retirement uniform of old khakis and a polo shirt, but in a pressed button-down and slacks, the kind of clothes I used to wear to client meetings. I found Fiona's death certificate in my filing cabinet, some instinct telling me I would need it. The main branch of the Bank of Austin downtown was an imposing structure of glass and steel. Inside, the cool, quiet air of the marble lobby felt a world away from the turmoil in my heart. A young woman at the front desk guided me through the process. It was slow, methodical. I presented my ID, the death certificate, and the box number. She checked her computer, her expression professional and unreadable. "The box was last accessed 5 years ago, Mr. O'Connor," she said, finally looking up. "You are listed as the surviving spouse, with right of access. I'll take you to the vault." She led me through a massive circular steel door into a room lined with thousands of identical metal drawers. The air was still and cold. Using her key and one I was given, she slid out a long, surprisingly heavy metal box and handed it to me. She then showed me to a small, windowless privacy room, furnished with only a table and a single chair. "Take all the time you need," she said softly before closing the heavy door behind her, leaving me in absolute silence. For a long moment, I just stared at the cold metal box. My Fiona had been in this very bank, perhaps this very room, placing something inside this container without ever telling me. My hands trembled as I finally lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was money. Stacks of $100 bills, neatly bundled with rubber bands. I did a quick, rough count. There had to be at least $50,000. My mind reeled. Fiona was a nurse. I was an engineer. We had lived comfortably, but we were not wealthy people. How had she saved so much, without me ever knowing? Then I saw it. Beneath the last stack of cash was a thick, cream-colored envelope. My name was written on the front in her elegant, familiar script. David. This was the real treasure. My fingers shook as I carefully broke the seal. Inside were 3 pages covered in her handwriting. I took a deep, shuddering breath and began to read. "My dearest David," it began, and I could hear her voice in every word. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the worst has happened. I need you to listen, my love. I saved this money over decades, a little from every overtime shift you thought was just for a new roof or a vacation. I saved it for you, to protect you from our daughter." The words were a physical blow. I read on, my vision blurring. She recounted things I had dismissed at the time: Brenda's tantrum, when we refused to pay for the entirety of her lavish wedding 20 years ago, the way she'd casually borrowed and never returned thousands of dollars over the years. I had called it youthful irresponsibility. Fiona had seen it for what it was. "She doesn't love you, David," the letter continued, the words stark and brutal. "She loves what you provide. When I am gone, she and that useless husband of hers will see you as nothing but a resource to be drained until you are empty. They will move into our home and fill it with their greed until all my memory is gone. Do not let them. You are stronger than you think. You are a planner, an engineer. Use that mind of yours. Be strong. Live for yourself. Everything we built is yours, and yours alone." The letter ended with a final heartbreaking plea. "Promise me you will not let them win. Promise me you will be free. I love you always. Fiona." I sat there in the silent, cold room, the letter clutched in my hand, and wept. I wept for Fiona's foresight, for the burden she had carried alone. I wept for my own blindness. But as the tears subsided, something else took their place. The grief in my chest began to cool, to harden, solidifying into something new. It was a cold, clear, calculating resolve. Fiona hadn't just left me money. She had left me a blueprint, a mission, and I would not fail her. I didn't go home after leaving the bank. Instead, I drove to a small coffee shop, sat in a quiet corner, and opened my laptop. The engineer in me, dormant for years under a blanket of grief, was finally awake. Fiona's letter was the mission brief. The $50,000 was the project budget. Now, I needed to assemble my tools. My search history wasn't for family counselors. It was for elder law attorneys Austin and financial exploitation of seniors. This wasn't a family dispute to be mediated. It was a hostile occupation to be systematically dismantled. Patricia Morrison's name appeared third in the results. Her website was professional, no nonsense. Her biography detailing a 20-year career protecting seniors' rights. I called and made an appointment for the following afternoon. When I walked into her office, I didn't come empty-handed. I had a typewritten timeline of events since Fiona's death, a spreadsheet detailing every loan to Kevin and Brenda totaling over $18,000, and Fiona's letter, sealed in a protective plastic sleeve. I laid it all out on her polished mahogany desk. Patricia, a sharp woman in her 50s with intelligent eyes, reviewed everything in silence. She read the spreadsheet first, her expression hardening. Then she read Fiona's letter, twice. When she finally looked up, her gaze was filled with a formidable mix of sympathy and respect. "Mr. O'Connor," she said, her voice firm, "your wife was a brilliant strategist. She didn't just leave you a warning, she left you an arsenal. This letter establishes a clear, long-term pattern of manipulative behavior. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I had an ally." "What do we do?" I asked. "We don't act on emotion, we act on the law," she replied, already pulling out a legal pad. "First, you are the sole owner of the property. They are, legally, tenants at will with no lease. This gives us the power. Second, We need to document everything from this moment forward. Every rude comment, every demand, every mess they leave. Start a journal. Take pictures. She leaned forward. Third, and this is crucial, we need to secure your environment. Texas is a one-party consent state. You have every right to record conversations in your own home. I suggest you install cameras, Mr. O'Connor, the kind they won't notice. The final piece of the plan was the most elegant. We are going to offer them a formal lease agreement, she said. The terms will be reasonable, slightly below market rate for your neighborhood. This puts them in a formal, legal bind. If they refuse to sign or fail to pay, we have immediate, undeniable grounds for eviction. If they do pay, well, then they're finally contributing. I left her office feeling a sense of clarity I hadn't known in years. That evening, I ordered a security system online, 2 cameras disguised as modern smoke detectors. When they arrived 2 days later, I waited until Brenda and her family went out. Installing them felt like reclaiming a piece of my own home. I was a retired civil engineer. Mounting a device and running a wire was second nature. The methodical work calmed me. I placed one in the corner of the living room, with a clear view of the front door and my recliner. The other went in the hallway upstairs. I tested the feed on my phone. The image was crystal clear. A week later, I was back in Patricia's office. I had a notebook filled with dated entries and a memory card with several recordings of Kevin and Brenda complaining about my stinginess. Patricia didn't even look at them yet. She simply slid a crisp, multi-page document across the desk to me. It was the rental agreement. "Let's see how they react when they get this," she said, a small, confident smile playing on her lips. Patricia didn't want me to just hand them the papers. "This needs to be official, undeniable," she'd said. No arguments about whether they received it. So she hired a professional process server. At 2 o'clock on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I had been sitting in the living room reading a book, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. I was ready. From my chair I had a perfect view of the front door, and I knew so did the tiny lens of the new smoke detector. I opened the door to a polite, professionally dressed woman in her 40s. "I have a legal document for Miss Brenda Thompson," she said, her voice neutral. Brenda came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "I'm Brenda Thompson. Who are you?" "I'm a registered process server for Travis County. This is for you." She handed the thick envelope to Brenda and held out a clipboard. "I just need you to sign here, acknowledging receipt." "Oh." Brenda took the envelope, her brow furrowed in suspicion. She tore it open, pulling out the rental agreement. I watched her eyes scan the first page. First, there was confusion. Then, a short, sharp laugh of disbelief. Finally, as the reality of the words $1,500 monthly rent, tenant responsibilities, 30-day notice sank in, her face darkened into a mask of pure rage. "What the hell is this?" she shrieked, whirling on me. "A rental agreement? Is this some kind of sick joke?" The server remained impassive. "My job is complete. Have a good day." She turned and walked away before the storm fully broke. Kevin and Haley were drawn out by the shouting. Kevin snatched the papers from Brenda's hand, his face growing redder as he read. Haley peered over his shoulder, her jaw dropping. "He's lost his mind," Kevin snarled, throwing the papers onto the coffee table. "He can't do this." "Oh." They all turned to face me, a united front of indignation. "After everything I've done for you, living here, taking care of you after Mom died?" Brenda's voice rose, thick with manufactured victimhood. "This is how you repay me. Fiona would be ashamed of you." Haley chimed in, her tone dripping with youthful entitlement. "Grandpa, this is our house too. We live here. You can't just make us pay rent like we're strangers." I remained silent, my gaze steady. My calmness seemed to infuriate them more than any argument could have. I was no longer playing their emotional game. I was simply an observer, a data collector, and the little red light on my laptop, connected to the camera feed, confirmed the data was being collected beautifully. "You're not all there, are you, old man?" Kevin said, taking a step closer. His attempt at intimidation was obvious. "This is what happens when people get old. They get confused. Don't you worry, we'll get a doctor to look at you. We'll get guardianship. We'll take care of you and this house." The threat was clear. They weren't just refusing, they were escalating. "We are not signing a thing," Brenda declared, crossing her arms. "And we are not paying you 1 single cent. This is our home, and we're not going anywhere." Kevin moved until he was standing directly in front of my chair, forcing me to look up at him. He leaned down, his voice a low, menacing growl. "You're going to regret this, old man." After their initial explosion of rage, a new, colder kind of war began. The shouting matches stopped, replaced by a thick, hostile silence and a campaign of passive-aggressive warfare designed to wear me down. It started with noise. Kevin began watching action movies in the living room late into the night. The volume turned up so loud that the floorboards in my bedroom vibrated with each explosion. Brenda would slam kitchen cabinets with unnecessary force, the sharp cracks echoing through the house like gunshots. It was deniable who could prove a cabinet was slammed with malice. But I noted it all in my journal, with dates and times. Then came the physical intimidation. Kevin, a man who typically only moved between the couch and the refrigerator, suddenly developed a habit of loitering in the narrow upstairs hallway. Whenever I left my bedroom, he would be there, leaning against the wall, forcing me to squeeze past him. He never touched me, never said a word, but his physical presence was a constant, looming threat. I made it a point to trigger these encounters in view of the hallway camera, my face impassive as I navigated around the human obstacle he had become. I was no longer just living in my home. I was a surveillance expert documenting a siege. The next front opened online. An old neighbor from across the street. A kind man named George called me, his voice hesitant. "David? George here. Say, is everything all right? My wife saw a post from your granddaughter. Seemed a bit worrying." After we hung up, I did something I hadn't done before. I searched for Haley's social media profiles. They were public. There, amidst photos of brunches and selfies, was a post from 2 days ago. It was a picture of me from last Christmas, looking tired. The caption was a masterpiece of vague manipulation. "So sad to see my grandpa struggling. We're trying our best to take care of him, but he's just not himself lately. Please pray for our family during this difficult time." The comments were sickeningly sympathetic, offering prayers for the poor family dealing with a confused elderly relative. She was building a public narrative, laying the groundwork for Kevin's threat of a competency hearing. I took meticulous screenshots, saved them in a new subfolder titled Defamation, and sent them to Patricia. The final escalation was the most brazen. I'd been waiting for a letter from Patricia with a summary of our strategy. The mail usually arrived around noon, but for the past 3 days my mailbox had been empty when I checked. I found the missing letters later, tucked beneath a stack of junk mail on the kitchen counter. Brenda had started intercepting my mail. On the 4th day, I found the day's mail hidden in a drawer, underneath the dish towels. Among them was the envelope from Patricia's law firm. My heart went cold. The flap wasn't sealed properly. It had been clumsily opened and pressed shut again, the paper slightly torn near the edge where a finger or a knife had pried it open. They weren't just trying to annoy me or intimidate me anymore. They were actively trying to sabotage my legal efforts, to steal my strategy right from my lawyer's hands. I held the violated envelope, a federal offense, in my hand. This was the proof I needed. This was no longer just a family drama. It was a calculated campaign. Knowing they had read Patricia's letter changed the atmosphere in the house yet again. Their passive aggression was now tinged with a smug confidence. They thought they knew my strategy, thought they could outmaneuver me. That evening, their arrogance finally boiled over into the mistake Patricia had been waiting for. I went to the kitchen around 10 o'clock to make my nightly cup of chamomile tea, a small ritual that helped me settle my thoughts. Kevin was there, standing directly in front of the refrigerator, blocking the path to the sink. He wasn't getting anything. He was just standing there, an intentional roadblock. It was the hallway tactic, now moved to a more confined space. "Excuse me, Kevin," I said calmly, holding my empty mug. He turned slowly, a sneer on his face. "Getting a little late for you to be wandering around, isn't it, David? You might fall." He took a deliberate step to the side, but only just enough to still block my path. "Read any interesting mail lately? Anything from that fancy lawyer of yours telling you how to steal the house from your own family?" So that was it. They'd read the letter and misinterpreted it as an act of aggression, not a response to their own. I didn't take the bait. I just want to make some tea. Family helps each other out, he continued, his voice dripping with false concern. Maybe you need help. Maybe your mind isn't as sharp as it used to be. That's what we're here for, to help. He was building the narrative for his guardianship threat, saying the words he wanted a judge to hear, forgetting that a camera sees everything. I ignored him and tried to edge past toward the sink. As I moved into the small gap he'd left, he shifted his weight. His hand shot out and he shoved me, hard, in the chest. "Watch where you're going," he snarled. The force of it sent me stumbling backward. I hit the edge of the kitchen counter with a painful thud, the ceramic mug clattering to the floor. I didn't fall, but the impact knocked the wind out of me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a jolt of adrenaline and shock coursing through me. But even as I gasped for breath, one clear, cold thought cut through the chaos. The living room camera has a perfect angle on the kitchen entrance. He'd done it. He had crossed the final line in full view of my silent, digital witness. Kevin looked down at me, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. He thought he had proven his dominance, that his physical power was the final word in any argument. He smirked, then turned and sauntered back to the living room, leaving me to pick up the pieces of my mug. I took a few deep breaths, my hands gripping the counter until the trembling stopped. I didn't say a word. I simply swept up the broken ceramic, threw it away, and got a new mug. I filled it with water, heated it, and steeped my tea. I performed these mundane actions with deliberate calm. Then I walked back to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I sat at my desk, my hands steady now. I opened my laptop and navigated to the security feed. I rewound the footage to 5 minutes earlier. And there it was, crystal clear. Kevin's provocation, my attempt to pass, his hand shooting out, my body lurching backward into the counter, his triumphant smirk. It was undeniable. I saved the clip, naming it Assault, Kevin Thompson, date. I opened my email, composed a new message to Patricia, and attached the file. In the subject line, I typed 6 simple words. We have what we need. Patricia called me first thing the next morning. Her voice was sharp, energized. David, the video is perfect. It's clear, undeniable assault. This is the silver bullet. We can file for an emergency protective order and have them out of there in 2 weeks, maybe less. I listened, letting her lay out the legal victory that was now within our grasp. They had handed it to us on a silver platter. But as she spoke, a new idea, something more final and more complete, began to form in my mind, inspired by Fiona's letter. They weren't just occupying a space. They were squatting on what they considered their future prize. Patricia, I interrupted gently. The protective order is good, we'll file it. But that's just a battle. I want to win the war. What are they fighting for? The house. They think it's their birthright, their inheritance. What if there was no house to fight for? There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her sharp legal mind. Then she let out a low whistle. David, you want to sell it. Right out from under them. Exactly, I said. That's not just a legal move. It's a strategic one, she said, a new level of respect in her voice. You're not just removing the squatters, you're removing the entire battlefield. It's brilliant. I know just the agent to call. For the next few days, I let my family live in their bubble of ignorant triumph. Kevin walked around the house with a certain swagger, convinced his act of aggression had put me in my place. Brenda made loud, pointed phone calls to her friends about the stress of caring for an elderly parent who's losing his grip. They were performing for an audience of one, trying to build their case for my incompetence, completely unaware that the game had changed, and they were already in checkmate. On Friday morning, the doorbell rang. It was a man in a sharp suit carrying a tablet and a laser measuring device. His name was Robert, the real estate agent Patricia had recommended. I greeted him warmly and invited him in. Brenda appeared from the kitchen, a suspicious look on her face. Dad, who is this? This is Robert, I said calmly, as he began to professionally assess the living room. He's a real estate agent. Kevin laughed from his throne on my recliner. A what? What for? You're not selling this place. I ignored him and began the tour, pointing out the features of the house to Robert. The roof was replaced in 2018. The foundation is solid rock slab, typical for this part of Austin. I built the back deck myself in '95. I spoke of the house not as a home filled with memories, but as an asset, a property with market value. My detachment seemed to unnerve them more than any shouting match could have. They hovered in the background, whispering furiously, their smug confidence beginning to crack. After an hour, Robert had all the measurements and photos he needed. He shook my hand at the door. "I'll have the listing active by tomorrow morning," he said loud enough for everyone to hear, and left. An hour after that, another truck pulled up to the curb. A young man hopped out, carrying a wooden post and a large sign. He walked onto the front lawn and began hammering the post into the ground. Brenda, Kevin, and Haley rushed to the front window. I stood back, watching their faces. The young man finished his work, hanging the large, rectangular sign from the post. The colors were brilliant, undeniable red and white. The letters were big, bold, and screamed a single message to the entire neighborhood: for sale. Brenda's face went white. All the color, all the arrogance, all the righteous indignation drained away, replaced by a slack-jawed, horrified disbelief. She looked from the sign to me and back to the sign. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She was staring at her future, the one she had banked on, the one she had stolen and betrayed for, being hammered into the ground and offered up to the highest bidder. The Travis County Courthouse was a solemn place of stone and quiet reverence for the law. I walked through the security checkpoint with Patricia by my side, my back straight, Fiona's necklace resting coolly against my skin under my shirt. Across the marble hall, I saw them: Brenda, Kevin, Haley, and a tired-looking lawyer who seemed to be radiating defeat already. Brenda tried to catch my eye, to offer some kind of sorrowful, pleading look, but I kept my gaze fixed forward. The time for emotional manipulation was over. Today, only facts mattered. Inside the courtroom, we sat at our respective tables. The air was thick with tension. The judge, a woman named Elena Rodriguez, entered and took her seat. She had a reputation for being sharp, fair, and having no patience for theatrics. Brenda's lawyer went first. He launched into the narrative they had been building for weeks. He painted a picture of a grieving, confused old man, isolated and vulnerable. He spoke of their loving care, their selfless sacrifice in moving in to support me. He suggested that my recent erratic behavior hiring a lawyer, demanding rent, and now attempting to sell the family home was clear evidence of a deteriorating mental state, likely influenced by my new, aggressive attorney. "Your Honor," he concluded, "we are not here as tenants, but as a concerned family requesting a formal competency evaluation for my client's father." I sat perfectly still, my hands resting on the table, just as Patricia had coached me. I did not react. I simply observed. Then, it was Patricia's turn. She walked to the podium with a calm, commanding presence. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and strong. "My client, Mr. David O'Connor, is not confused. He is, however, the victim of long-term financial and emotional abuse at the hands of the very people claiming to be his caretakers." She started with the finances, displaying the spreadsheet on the courtroom monitors. Over the past 3 years, my client has given his daughter and her husband over $18,000 in undocumented, unrepaid loans. This is not caretaking. It is exploitation. Next, she addressed the issue of my mental state. Mr. O'Connor's family has suggested he is suffering from confusion. Let's hear a sample of their concerned care. She played a short audio clip from the living room camera, the one from the day the rental agreement was served. The courtroom filled with Brenda's shrieks, Haley's entitled whining, and Kevin's threats of a guardianship hearing. Brenda sank lower in her chair, her face pale. "And finally, Your Honor," Patricia said, her voice dropping slightly, building the tension. "The family claims they moved in to provide a safe, supportive environment. I would now like to show the court a 30-second video clip from 2 weeks ago, recorded in my client's kitchen." She clicked the mouse. The video appeared on the monitors. The courtroom was silent as they watched Kevin sneer, block my path, and then shove me hard against the counter. The video was high definition, the audio crystal clear. It captured his smug smirk afterward perfectly. Brenda's lawyer looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Kevin stared at the screen, his face a mask of disbelief that his actions had been recorded. Patricia paused the video on a close-up of Kevin's sneering face. That, Your Honor, is the supportive environment my client has been forced to endure. We have nothing further at this time. Judge Rodriguez stared at the frozen image on the screen for a long moment. Then, her gaze shifted, moving slowly over to Kevin and Brenda. She took off her reading glasses, her eyes cold as steel. Her voice cut through the silence of the room. I've seen enough. Oh. Judge Rodriguez placed her glasses back on and looked down at the documents before her, though her decision was already made. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. My own breathing sounded loud in my ears. She addressed Brenda and Kevin directly, her voice leaving no room for argument. I find the evidence presented by Miss Morrison to be clear and compelling. This court has seen proof of a multi-year pattern of financial exploitation, a campaign of harassment and defamation, and a clear act of physical assault. She looked directly at Kevin. Mr. Thompson, your behavior was reprehensible. This court is issuing an immediate temporary restraining order. You are to remain no less than 100 yards from Mr. O'Connor and his property at all times. Then her gaze fell upon Brenda. Miss Thompson, you were offered a reasonable, legally binding path to formalize your tenancy. You not only refused, you responded with threats and took part in the harassment of your own father. You have abused his trust in his home. She picked up her gavel. Therefore, the petition for eviction is granted. The respondents, she said, nodding towards Brenda, Kevin, and Haley, have 30 days to vacate the premises at 2412 Willow Creek Drive. If you are not gone by that deadline, the Travis County Sheriff's Office will be authorized to remove you. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp, final crack. It was over. Brenda let out a strangled sob. Kevin stared straight ahead, his face white with silent fury. Their lawyer was already packing his briefcase, eager to distance himself from the wreckage. Patricia touched my arm. Let's go, David. We stood and walked toward the exit. As we stepped into the marble hallway, Brenda rushed towards me, her face streaked with mascara, her carefully constructed composure shattered. Dad, please, she cried, grabbing my arm. You can't do this. Where will we go? We have nowhere to go. We're your family. I'm sorry, okay? We'll change, I promise. We'll pay the rent. We'll do anything. Just stop this. I stopped and looked at her, truly looked at her. I saw the features Fiona had given her, but none of her mother's warmth, none of her strength. All I saw was a desperate woman who had been caught. I gently removed her hand from my arm. Your mother wrote me a letter, Brenda, I said, my voice cold and steady. She told me this day would come. She said that you don't love me. You love what I provide, that you would see me as nothing more than a resource to be drained until I was empty. Oh, the fake tears on her face dried instantly, replaced by a look of stunned shock. You had 3 years since she died to act like a daughter, I continued, the words coming not from a place of anger, but of absolute clarity. You chose to act like a parasite instead. Fiona told me to be strong and live for myself. And that is exactly what I am going to do. You are no longer my problem. I turned to Patricia. We're done here. We began to walk away, leaving Brenda standing shell-shocked in the middle of the hallway. As we reached the far end of the corridor, her shock finally gave way to a last, desperate burst of rage. This isn't the end of it, she shrieked, her voice echoing off the marble walls. It was the desperate cry of someone who had just lost everything and had only empty threats left. I didn't look back. I didn't even slow down, because I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it was. The 30 days passed in a state of tense, suffocating silence. I confined myself mostly to my bedroom and my small hobby space, meticulously assembling a detailed wooden model of a battleship. The quiet focus of the work was a balm. I could hear them packing intermittently, the scrape of boxes, muffled arguments, the sound of things being handled with angry carelessness. They were ghosts haunting their own past, resentful of their eviction from a home they never truly valued. On the final day, a cheap rental truck rumbled into the driveway. I watched from my window as they loaded their lives in a chaotic jumble of cardboard and resentment. There was no final conversation, no dramatic farewell. Just before they drove away, Brenda walked to my bedroom door. She didn't knock. She simply dropped a single key onto the floor in the hallway, the metallic clink echoing with finality. Through the peephole, I saw her give my door one last hateful glare before turning and walking out of my life. I waited a full hour after the truck's engine faded down the street. I wanted the air to settle, for their toxic presence to completely dissipate. Then, I unlocked my door and stepped out to survey what was left of my home. It was worse than I expected. They had taken their belongings, but they had left their bitterness behind as a parting gift. In the living room, long, deep gouges scarred the hardwood floors where the couch had been dragged, not lifted. The kitchen counter, which Fiona had kept spotless for 40 years, was marred with several cigarette burns, a habit Kevin only indulged in when he was angry. A cabinet door hung crookedly from a single hinge. I walked upstairs, my steps echoing in the empty house. The master bedroom, where Brenda and Kevin had slept, had a fist-sized hole in the drywall, a clear testament to Kevin's final, impotent rage. In Haley's room, a bottle of bright pink nail polish had been spilled across the beige carpet, and a crude drawing was scribbled in marker on the wall that had been hidden by her headboard. I felt a wave of weariness wash over me, but not anger. Fiona's letter had been a vaccine against their poison. I had expected this. This mess, this petty destruction, was the final, perfect piece of evidence of who they truly were. It was their signature. I took out my phone. I didn't just take pictures. I began to record a video, walking slowly through each room, narrating in the calm, measured voice of an engineer documenting structural flaws. Date: August 28th. Time: 4:15 p.m., I began. This is a walkthrough of the property at 2412 Willow Creek Drive, documenting the condition after the tenants have vacated. In the living room, we have multiple deep scratches in the flooring, consistent with heavy furniture being dragged. Moving to the kitchen, we have burn marks on the laminate countertop. I documented everything, my voice never wavering. Each piece of damage was another line in the final report, another data point proving my case. This wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. It was about seeing this project through to its logical, just conclusion. After I finished, I went to my desk, uploaded the video and photos to a new folder on my laptop labeled Property Damages, and attached it to a new email. The recipient was Patricia Morrison. The subject line was, Final Accounting. The body of the email was short and to the point. Patricia, please find attached documentation of the damages left at the property. The rental agreement states a security deposit of $1,500 was required. Please inform the former tenants that their deposit is forfeit to cover initial repairs, and send them an itemized bill for the remaining damages. The sale of the house closed 3 weeks later. I sat at a long table in a title company's sterile conference room, signing my name on what felt like 100 documents. Across from me sat the young couple who were buying the house. They were bright-eyed and full of plans, and when I handed them the keys, I felt not a pang of sadness, but a profound sense of peace. The house had been a fortress, then a prison. Now, it was just a house again, ready for a new family to fill it with better memories. My new home was a second-floor apartment in a quiet, 55-plus community in a peaceful part of Austin. It was smaller, yes, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every picture on the wall, was chosen by me, for me. The silence was the greatest luxury. It was a clean, healing silence, filled only by the low hum of the air conditioner and the rustle of newspapers. I converted the second bedroom into my hobby room. It wasn't a loud, dusty workshop, but a quiet space for precision work. I set up a workbench by the window, which overlooked a small green courtyard. I arranged my hand tools, my wood-carving knives, and a small, quiet Dremel tool for detailed work. For the first time in years, I had a space to create, not just to exist. My first project was for Fiona. I bought a beautiful piece of dark cherry wood and began to craft a small shadow box. The work was slow, methodical. The scent of the wood filled the small room. I cut the dovetail joints by hand. The careful precision, a form of meditation. I wasn't just building a box. I was building a shrine, a proper home for the memory that had saved me. This act of creation felt like the final step in reclaiming my life from the chaos they had left behind. One afternoon, while the varnish on the box was drying, I found an old address book. I flipped through the pages, seeing the names of friends I'd lost touch with, casualties of the years I'd spent managing my daughter's endless crises. I hesitated, then dialed a number. "Dennis?" I asked when a familiar voice answered. "David? David O'Connor, is that you?" "I'll be damned." We talked for over an hour. We talked about old engineering projects, about our grandkids, about the years that had passed. It was easy, comfortable. "I'm on my own now, Dennis," I told him. "Living in a new place. It's quiet." "Good for you, my friend," he said, his voice warm with understanding. "It's about time you had some peace. How about a game of chess next week?" "Prepare to lose," I said, and for the first time in a long time, I laughed. A real, genuine laugh. That evening, the shadow box was finished. It was perfect. The wood glowed with a deep, rich luster. The joints were seamless. I opened the small glass door and carefully placed Fiona's necklace inside, arranging the gold chain on a bed of black velvet. I hung the box on the living room wall, right across from my armchair. The last rays of the Texas sun streamed through the window, catching the gold of the locket. It shone with a soft, gentle light. I stood there for a long time just looking at it, a symbol of love, of foresight, of a battle fought and won. I touched the warm glass of the box, my heart full not with sadness, but with a quiet, profound gratitude. I smiled, a real smile, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. "I did it, Fiona," I whispered to the quiet room. "I'm free." Sometimes the greatest love isn't about holding on, but about giving someone the strength to let go and fight for themselves. Fiona's last gift wasn't the money she left behind, but the permission she gave me to choose my own peace. It was a long and difficult road, but every step was a journey back to myself. True family isn't about obligation or what you can take. It's about the respect you give and the peace you build together. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like. Subscribe to our channel for more content, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening,